Hey folks, welcome to another episode of ASP.NET Core from Zero to Overkill. So in this episode, because in the last episode we talked about ASP.NET Core middlewares and how they work to handle the request pipeline and handle the requests, enrich them, and we could put one after the other and they would call each other. In this episode, I thought it made sense to talk about MVC filters, as it's somewhat a similar concept but exclusive to MVC. So the middleware is something that works in ASP.NET Core if we use MVC or not. But the filters are exclusive to MVC. So as you can see, basically in the request pipeline we have the various middlewares before, and then when we enter the MVC middleware, we go into the routing one, action, selection, MVC, action invocation pipeline, and filter pipeline. So the various filters are invoked here inside the MVC middleware. So there are 5 types of filters. I'm not going to talk about them all. I'm just going to show some examples of a couple of them and show ways of using them, but not everyone's every filter. So we have authorization filters, the first ones that run for checking authorization. Resource filters, you can check the docs, but handle request after authorization, run code before the pipeline, stuff. Action filters that are invoked before and after calling a controller action. Exception filters, which are invoked when an exception occurs. And result filters that can run after the result and can transform the result. I'll talk mostly about action filters and exception filters. The rest is really similar, so no need to make one of each. But you can check here also the precedence between filters. So enter middleware, then go to authorization, then resource, enter exception, model binding. So this is important because if we want to make changes to the model to influence the model binding, we should do them before the action filter. So not in the exception, because these are for exceptions, but probably in the resource filter. It's probably over here. Like I said, can we influence model binding, caching stuff. So then go into actions, result execution, stuff like that. So we'll play a bit around. Model binding is, if you're not aware, model binding is basically I'll show the example. If we go to the controller and then we get this object here, model binding is what allows the MVC to convert the request payload, be it JSON or in this case www form encoded or stuff like that, and gets it from the request payload and transforms it into an object. So this is model binding. If we want to make some weird model binding, we can define our own model binding. I haven't really talked about it and in the plan, but maybe I should add that to the plan to talk about model binding. But yeah, that's what converts the request and its payload, the query string, and the route parameters, and are bound to the action argument. It's what's called model binding. So when we get into action filter, the model binding is already done. We can already work with that. But if we want to influence it, we can do it before, or we can implement some model binding strategies. Maybe I'll add that to my list to talk about in the future. But this episode will focus on the filters. So I'll start by creating some action filters to show how to create them and how to register them for usage. So let's go here. I'll close this part that's not important. Create a new folder in the demo. filters. So for starters, I'll create okay, so we implement the on action executing and executed. So this is run before and this is run after. So I'm creating a constructor and I want a logger. All my samples basically log stuff. But okay, when we start really doing the application, it will be more interesting. But I think starting with these concepts is more important right now. So what can we do with this? So let's log something. Log information. Let me just do something here. We had this in warning. Let's move it to trace because it's not that relevant anymore for these samples. Let's log some information. So always problems with the keyboard. Where action. The argument will be a complex object, so okay. Let's see. So now we can use the context to get information about the action that we'll be executing. So we can go here and get like action descriptor, name, and then action arguments. Good. It's a what's this? It's a dictionary. Yeah. So by using this at here, it will print the whole object instead of just like the toString, like we talked in the logging episode, the structure logging stuff. So let's go here. Now copy this, get out of the way. After executing action. Okay. Okay. So now we need to register this. As you see, this is a class as normal. So implement the interface, got the dependencies in the constructor, then implementing the interface before the action executing and after. Now we need to register this. Sorry. So let's go to startup, and in this case we can go here to MVC and there's an overload. And we can do options dot filters add. Okay. Can't I do this? I think I can do this. Yeah, I can. But I don't want it like this. Go down. Okay. So we are registering the filter in MVC, so it will run for all requests. And now we go here, source web, and if I didn't do anything wrong, it should start logging everything we do that goes into the controllers. So we here, okay. So if we go to groups, and we got here, so the name, this is the name of the logger, so demo action filter, information, before executing action, too much index, okay. So it's the whole name, but okay. Let me check one thing. Weird. Okay. Got it. So if I remove this, apparently it already has some. Sure, whatever. But okay, the important thing is it logs the name of the action and the arguments. Because there are no arguments, it's empty. It's an empty dictionary. Now, if we create a new one, new stuff, we can now see. So this is where to create, but without arguments, because it was the first get to go into the creation page. Then this was the create again, but in this case, okay, the create really. If we remember, I can show you. Yeah, the create action, it's just a get to return the view, and then we have the create really with this awesome name that makes really receives the post and stores the information. So we have the create really with arguments, model, ID, stuff. Okay. And we can print more things if we go here. Let me check what we have here. So context dot model state. Model state might be interesting. And let's go back here. And there's more information, so feel free to play around and check out what we can do with this. So back to groups, because it's in memory, we lost our information. Something. Now we can see. No. Notice what I did wrong. I forgot yet. Without yet, we don't get the detail. So we got the toString of the model state. These are empty, but this one made a toString of the model state dictionary. Dictionary? It's a dictionary. Yeah, dictionary. So create a new one. Stuff. Now model state, where it is. So arguments. And the posted arguments and model state, key name, value, stuff. It's a bunch of subkey, buffer name, length 4. I don't know. Okay, but it says it's valid and new value stuff and a bunch of stuff. Okay, so this is a basic way to do an action filter that is registered for every controller and action. If you notice, if we go to ping, we got the pong response, the logging of the pong from the middleware we created in the last episode, but no logging from the filter, because it only works on MVC. So if we go back to groups, now we get the logging. Okay, so this is registered for every action controller that exists. Let's take a look at some alternatives. Another way you probably already saw or used, even if not knowing it was a filter, to use filters is like with attributes. So we can go here and let's create another class, demo action filter attribute, and let's say action filter attribute, and here we can override on action executing. And over here what we can do is the same we did in the other one, but in this case, as it is an attribute, we can grab it, go to the groups controller, and I'll go with edit. No, I'll go with here. So I'll add the attribute here. You'll see why. So I'm going to the attribute, and now I'm going to context.actionArguments. So this is a dictionary of the arguments. If you remember here, when you do a create and an edit, the arguments are basically this. So model stuff, because it's on the controller model. So what we can do is put it here and check if group and if group ID group ID 1. So if we get a model in our request, and the model is of type group view model, so it means it's either create really or an edit. Now that I remember, you can use the attribute or on the action or on the controller. I'll put it in the controller, so it will be used in the edit and in create. So we got back here. So if we got a model and it's a group and its ID it's 1, then let's do group.name equals we'll add it here, added it on name of demo action filter attribute. Okay, so on every action that has a group with ID 1, we'll add this attribute. Because I'm using it in the controller, this action will run for every action of the controller, but will only do something when it enters the if. So let's check this working. It's already running. Yeah. So refresh, empty. We create something. Stuff, nothing happened because when we posted, so if we go here to create really, it posted, but the ID was 0 because it generated server side. Right now stuff is as ID 1, but the ID was set after. So if we now save, okay, so it went here because ID is 1. So if we go here, create another, enter, save, nothing happens over here. Okay, so yeah, it's a stupid example, but it's just to show what we can do. And yeah, and like you see, I could do here, or I can just grab this and move it here. Oh, I can put in create really and in edit, just to show. Basically in create really it will never do anything because there's no ID, but in edit there will be an ID. So let's run create stuff, create more stuff, nothing happens. If we go here, save, nothing happens. If we go here, save, it happened. So yeah. So the difference in this case, it's an attribute. We didn't register this anywhere but here, so there's really no dependency injection here. We can't get stuff in the constructor because it's just an attribute over there. But we probably want, if we want to do something more complex than this, to get dependencies. If I wanted to log something, this would not be good. So now let's see some examples of exception filters and use that to check out how we could do the dependency injection with attributes. So to create an exception filter, it's basically the same. So class demo exception filter, then exception filter, implement interface on exception. So when we get an exception, we can do something. See what we have in the context. Exception. I'm going to do another stupid stupid thing for demos is an argument exception. So if it is an argument exception, I want to go to the context, result equals bad request result, because why not? Okay, basic stuff, but we want to log something, so just because of reasons, so constructor demo exception filter, and let's log, I don't know, it's an information. A bad request isn't really, it's the user's fault, depending, but okay, information in this case. I'll put an error just for it to be read. And okay, now how do we register this? How do we put this in an attribute? Like we saw here, the attribute couldn't receive arguments because it's an attribute. So there are a couple of ways. Before that, let me just, I think I didn't mention it, but basically if we put a result here, this will short circuit the filter pipeline, and it will end and put here. So if we did this in the action, it would also stop. The action wouldn't be executed. It would respond immediately with what we put in with the result. So right now we're putting a result and it's done. So registering this is not an attribute, so we can't put it directly in the controller, but there is an attribute, I think, service filter, and we can put this. So this is basically an attribute, that basically a filter that applies the filter. So does things, creates an instance, filter factory, we'll check that out. So basically this allows us to apply a filter just to one place without having to develop an attribute. And it started, so I start, and we got an exception. Why? Because we didn't register the filter. So we need to put this in the startup. Transient. Done. So now okay, now it works, but nothing happens because we are not throwing an exception. So let me go here and okay, now refresh. We got an exception. Over here, the network, let's saw it again, 400. That's the result we added. And we got here error transforming. So it went there. And it logs, so it got the information in its constructor. Okay, this is one way of doing this. There's another way, that is basically we are using this service filter as a factory for our filters, but if for some reason we want it, we could do our own. So class no exception, how was that? Factory attribute, I think it was something like this. Let me just check on my sheets. something like this. So we can go here, we want it to be an attribute, so attribute, and we want to implement an interface that's called iFilter filter factory. Is reusable? Nope. If we want, you could see this filter factory. It's all here in the docs, of course. So you come back here. This is to say if the factory or if the filter is reusable. I'm saying no, for the same reason or lack of reason as in the startup. I used it as transient, so in this case here it's not reusable. So create instance, we get the service provider. So what we can do is get the filter equals service provider. I probably didn't talk about this when talking to about dependency injection, but we saw the service provider, which was the result, like without a FAQ and stuff like that. It's the built container with all the dependencies in there. So if we get a service provider, we can just do a get service or a get required service. The difference is that get required service throws an exception if it can't find the service. So this is like a service locator pattern, which is not good, but sometimes we need something like that. Like in this case, turn filter. Okay, so just so we can see a difference, I'll go into demo exception filter and create a suffix by service filter root and over here in the factory, where's the factory? Yeah, we'll set filter dot suffix equals by okay. Now you can go here and go into the controller and the same place we just had this. I can't remember if I need to do anything else. Let me check. We'll find out. Okay, so we get the demo exception filter attribute and this one. So they're doing basically the same. I don't know. They are both running, but they both had a result. Whatever. But basically, it's doing the same thing with this one or the other one. In this case, it's really not needed to implement all of this because it's done just by using the out-of-the-box service filter attribute. We did the same thing, so no need to create one of these. But well, it's possible. Maybe there's a use case where this is useful. So yeah, just to show the possibilities. Of course, there's a lot more to filters that I didn't talk about. I don't even use them that much. It's one of those things we create one or two and put it in working and never look at it again. But okay, so lots of info here on the docs, but the basic things I think it's covered. And like in the other subjects we've been talking about, the other concepts, as we need them, we'll go back to them and add more information as needed. So that's about it for this episode about filters. Okay, another concept. I think maybe in one or two more episodes in these concepts, and then I hope we can start more seriously on the application. But like I said too many times, maybe I think it's important we have these concepts so it's easier to dive into everything else. So like always, thanks for watching. Hope to see you in the next one. See yas.